The US-Israel-Iran situation is deteriorating, and the world is waiting for a historic and horrible tipping point. Early in the morning, precision military strikes attacked Kharg Island, Iran's oil export hub. The US confirmed it was striking Gulf military sites but leaving oil infrastructure alone. A calculated move demonstrated power and care. Conversely, Iranian media reported 2 civilian deaths and damage when a vital Kashan railway bridge was hit. This increased concerns that the war could spread beyond its targeted targets. As President Donald Trump's self-imposed deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz approaches, every Gulf port, ship, and pipeline feels like it may spark a battle. The Trump administration is portraying this as a military ultimatum and high-stakes negotiation. They claim diplomacy is running out, and that if Iran doesn't comply, infrastructure across the country might be destroyed. Global analysts debate whether Tehran will capitulate to pressure or go on the defensive due to its ideological rigidity, which might worsen the war than expected. Tehranians fear the next alarm, which might signal an evacuation or strike. People in big Israeli cities are being repeatedly reminded about missile defense measures, which makes them apprehensive in a way no simulation or civil defense exercise could. In the middle of all this, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, made a worse statement. If anyone crosses Iran's red lines, there will be a response that could target U.S. and allied infrastructure, cutting off oil and gas supplies for years. This proclamation was broadcast in state-run media with carefully selected missile system and military training images. This showed that Iran is projecting itself as a global power willing to defend itself. International observers are scrambling to assess the damage, knowing that any error may destabilize oil markets, shipping lanes, and fragile regional alliances. The battle in Washington has shifted from military strategy to political theater. President Trump said a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran doesn't meet U.S. demands in his latest social media posts. This statement was reported worldwide, in newsrooms and trade floors. The message sounds urgent, yet targeting civilian infrastructure for political motives may violate international law, raising legal and moral issues. The Iranian political situation is difficult. Although U.S. and Israeli military force stresses them physically and mentally, the dictatorship seems determined to stay strong and patient, using ideology and national pride. While civilians suffer more, this is happening. Tehran leaders reject half measures and insist on full concessions. This worsens the Washington impasse. Additional challenges arise because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made this campaign a matter of life and death for his political future, stating it is about more than military goals. His public words indicate that he wants to destroy Iran's military and vital infrastructure, even if it kills civilians. This aligns Israel's national strategy with the U.S. and increases the risk of extreme actions perceived worldwide. Other Middle Eastern nations are watching. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE are monitoring the situation since it could worsen and harm Gulf oil markets and regional security. Using its history with the U.S. and Iran, Pakistan supports mediation and de-escalation. It also warned that more strikes could derail diplomatic progress. Military experts believe these threats and planned military operations are part of a bigger strategy to push Iran to conform and demonstrate domestic and international audiences that U.S. and Israeli forces are in control. The violence is continuing affecting Lebanon and the occupied West Bank, according to reports. Missile attacks, arrests, and civilian disruptions illustrate that the crisis affects more than Iran and its neighbors. International observers are watching financial markets react to uncertainty. Oil prices are rising because to concerns of shipping lanes being closed and penalties or retaliatory strikes. Military, economic, and geopolitical implications are intertwined, as maritime experts predict blocking the Strait of Hormuz may disrupt a substantial portion of global oil exports. All this makes folks worry every day. After the Israeli military advised against taking trains in Iran, businesses closed early and emergency services were strained. Air raid sirens and public statements in Israel make society feel on edge, demonstrating how dangers and military activity have affected daily life. Experts think the psychological side of this conflict is as essential as the military side, and both governments seek to influence public perception as much as outcome. Strategically, Tehran and Washington use signaling and deterrence to influence each other and reassure their citizens of their power. This complex stalemate, with many participants and interests, tests military strength, patience, diplomacy, and the power of storytelling to influence decisions in a circumstance with little tolerance for error. Trump's deadline is approaching, and the world is waiting. Everyone knows that the next few hours could affect the struggle for months or years. Will Iran cave in or resist pressure, which might start a series of events no one can control? However, the US and Israel will strike if their threats are ignored. Mistakes can have dire consequences, making the situation perilous. Intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and battlefield updates hamper decision making. Despite planning and threat assessments, uncertainty remains. The world must decide. Will the deadline trigger a diplomatic resolution or an extraordinary escalation that could affect geopolitics forever? Next few hours are crucial in a fast paced, high stakes fight. The impacts will extend beyond the countries immediately involved, affecting energy markets, regional alliances, and international law. Meanwhile, people worldwide fear that one incorrect move might cause an unthinkable calamity. Iran's military command has shifted vital units into defensive positions throughout the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz as tensions escalate, signifying preparation and warning. Satellite photographs show armored columns and mobile missile batteries in strategic locations, as Iranian naval forces exercise to stop foreign ships entering their waters. According to intelligence sources, these actions are psychological as well as tactical. Even while sanctions and cyber strikes on its command and control networks are making logistics difficult, they are supposed to display strength and deter the US and Israel. Meanwhile, the US military has considerably increased its presence. More fighter squadrons and surface ships with advanced missile systems have been assigned to the USS Abraham Lincoln. American military leaders say these moves are defensive and defend international navigation. However, a massive, technologically advanced force is within striking distance of Iran. World leaders are trying to resolve the diplomatic issue. The EU has dispatched ambassadors to Washington and Tehran to try to reach a temporary ceasefire. But both sides have remained basically unchanged, citing the other's past behavior as proof that compromises are impossible. A special meeting of the UN Security Council is difficult and symbolic since veto powers threaten any actual conclusion. At a crucial time, authoritative mediation is lacking. The Israeli government has ordered many civil defense drills, and intelligence reports claim Hezbollah and other non-state forces are preparing to strike back if Iran is attacked for a long time. This drama is so sophisticated that each figure must consider military calculus, political survival, popular approval, and decades of historical grievances. Iranian and Western media share videos, photos, and victories on social media, which is a battleground for opinions. This simulates the information war. Analysts say the steady flow of unfounded rumors makes things unclear, and that even official statements are purposefully phrased to mislead or exaggerate for an advantage. Civilians are increasingly caught between the two forces, often without warning, before air raid sirens, naval operations, or missile tests. Injury victims from direct attacks and accidents flood Tehran and nearby hospitals. Food, fuel, and pharmaceutical supply chains are also stressed. Israel is often threatened by rocket attacks. Following government directives and using shelters is part of their daily lives, reminding them that the conflict is real. The stakes are enormous with money. Nearly a third of global oil exports come from the Gulf. Shipping or production issues affect global markets immediately. Oil prices have risen, and trade floors are reacting to Strait of Hormuz news live. Energy-dependent nations worry that long-term volatility could boost costs and disrupt supply lines for petrochemicals and transportation fuels. Cybersecurity experts warn of a new front, targeted assaults on electrical systems and financial institutions to worsen the physical struggle and provoke global economic turmoil. Analysts think this digital feature might affect civilian infrastructure and communication networks far from the war as much as a traditional attack. Connecting these stress levels increases the probability of a mistake. Military planners emphasize moderation, but history indicates that mistakes, whether human, technological, or intentional, can easily spiral out of control in tense situations. This arithmetic is difficult since both sides have superior missile and drone technology that can strike deep into enemy territory. Any engagement could start a chain reaction that lead to regional conflict. Washington's political drama worsens. President Trump's administration has emphasized that the situation is a moral obligation and a test of American power. The administration has briefed Congress that Iran's dominance of maritime choke points and threats to friends will have major implications. Opposition parties fear a long-term confrontation and the extent of the military action. They say U.S. government divisions make the policy tougher to understand. Tehran officials publicly assert sovereignty and national pride. However, they are discreetly considering tiny tactical changes to protect strategic assets. Military specialists advise moderation because overreaction might have dire implications, but internal politics make flexibility difficult. The IRGC remains powerful, justifying escalation with ideological devotion and military preparation to safeguard the nation. International shipping companies are rerouting across the Gulf to avoid danger spots. This delays shipments and raises insurance prices. Businesses and governments weigh the cost of shifting trade routes against the risk of conflict, which has immediate economic implications. Because energy markets, shipping lanes, and financial institutions are global, even tiny disputes can produce uncertainty that affects consumer goods and stock markets. From satellite reconnaissance to ground personnel, intelligence services are gathering a lot of data. Analysts emphasize real-time evaluation because delays in troop deployments or missile preparedness could put one side at peril. Foreign allies, trade partners, and global security interests are at stake in the precarious power balance. Russia and China are concerned about the situation worsening and have asked for calm while monitoring the region. Their statements demonstrate the battle's complexity. The US, Israel, and Iran are fighting, but global alliances, trade, and military balance are bigger issues. This makes the crisis a serious 21st century international issue. The effects are also felt in neighboring countries. Border areas face additional security, emergency drills, and economic issues. If the war escalates, humanitarian agencies say food and medical supplies would run out. This highlights how tough modern combat is for people and organizations in densely populated and interconnected locations. Nighttime doesn't reduce tension. Radar operators, military chiefs, and intelligence analysts are on high alert since the next few hours could transform the battle and geopolitical situation for 10 years. As deadlines approach, the likelihood of making a mistake, intentional or not, increases. In this deadly period, every move, word, and deed has consequences beyond the battlefield. The world is still focused on the Gulf, where military power, political requirements, and psychological pressure are creating a situation not seen in decades. Regular folks know that conflict is always a threat, and that every news update offers hope and anxiety. Leaders must balance short-term tactical advantages against long-term strategic goals, knowing that one wrong move might cause a regional or global catastrophe that alters alliances, economies, and political systems for years. The globe watches in real time, nervous and uncertain. They realize that what happens next will affect the Middle East and the world order. Regional anxiety reached a level few outside of power could appreciate by early morning. Satellite photographs showed that Iran has accelerated the deployment of its ballistic missile units, putting them within range of Gulf U.S. facilities and Israel's southern borders. These operations were accompanied by enhanced electronic warfare drills to disrupt enemy targeting and communications. Military analysts said these drills were real. Any confrontation might quickly escalate due to drones, hackers, and missile systems. U.S. intelligence networks also saw unusual activity in Iran's associated militias, including as Hezbollah and Kataib. They may have planned coordinated assaults on U.S. targets in Iraq and elsewhere. Planning for several issues was necessary due to indirect strikes complicating military estimates. The Washington administration increased messaging. Briefings for allies worldwide showed that the U.S. was ready to attack but wanted to avoid harming civilians. Despite the polished rhetoric, authorities privately conceded that showing strength without going too far was difficult. Military officials weighed the strategic benefit of targeted strikes against the possibility of Iran retaliating across the region. The Tehran government maintained public resistance, portraying the U.S. as a disruptive entity that aimed to violate Iran's sovereignty. Western troop movements were presented as evidence of aggressiveness and hopelessness, while propaganda tactics made the Iranian military look poised for conflict. The more powerful IRGC promoted ideological loyalty and tactical prowess through bolder shows of might. The psychological aspect of this conflict became increasingly apparent. Both sides employed defiance speeches and leaked intelligence files to test their opponent's strength. Analysts said managing perceptions was almost as critical as deployment, since missteps may generate unintended escalation. Iranian and Israeli civilians felt the stress. Injury victims from training accidents, missile testing, and internal unrest filled Tehran hospitals. People worried about the future. To ensure shelters, early warning systems, and emergency services were ready, Israel staged nationwide drills. Despite anxiety, people went about their daily lives, showing how robust society is under stress. Battle affected the economy greatly. Due to Strait of Hormuz supply concerns, oil prices rose to record highs. Countries that depend on Gulf oil scrambled to find alternatives, and global markets reacted strongly to the uncertainty. Cybersecurity experts said banks, electrical grids, and communication networks were more vulnerable to deliberate attacks to escalate the conflict. Diplomatically, things were precarious. The UN Security Council had multiple emergency meetings, but couldn't agree. European nations demanded moderation, but had little authority over the primary actors. Russia and China stressed the necessity of talks, but their strategic interests in the region showed they would act opportunistically if the crisis escalated. Ships swiftly shifted routes across the Gulf to avoid combat. Shipping companies altered ship routes, boosted insurance costs, and collaborated with Navy escorts to reduce risk. The outage threatened electrical supply and critical goods, demonstrating how regional volatility can affect the entire system. Everyone increased intelligence gathering. UAVs, satellites, and signals intelligence monitored troop movements, missile readiness, and electronic warfare. Analysts worked around the clock to compile this data, knowing one false signal might start a chain reaction. The already thick fog of war became virtually impossible to see through, indicating how dangerous it is for things to worsen in such a closely interwoven strategic context. Fears of missile reprisal prompted innovative Israeli defenses. The Iron Dome system was activated, early warning sirens were tested, and civil defense communications were strengthened to prepare people for anything. According to intelligence sources, Iran's proxy networks were plotting various counterattacks, making it tougher for Israel to prepare. Iran's domestic politics were very difficult. Political groupings inside the government debated whether to escalate military posturing, weighing nationalist sentiments against the risks of attacking a technologically superior enemy. The government promoted unity and strength, but insiders said each decision was carefully considered. The battle affected the world. During the market turbulence, commodities prices rose and investors sought safe havens. Energy-dependent nations prepared for shortages, and international news coverage made the situation look dire. If the instability persists, it may influence global trade, energy supplies, and investment flows. Social media became a major tool and battlefield. Unconfirmed reports of strikes, army movements, and deaths on platforms caused concern and may influence governmental decisions. Iran and the U.S. plotted their use of these channels, recognizing that information may be as effective as military action. As things changed, unintended fights became likely. Miscommunication, misidentifying targets, or technical issues can swiftly exacerbate conflicts when both sides are close. Military strategists stressed stringent rules and quick response mechanisms, yet they realized no system could eliminate risk in such a tight circumstance. Civilian humanitarian groups prepared for mass casualties, damaged supply chains, and forced migration. Hospitals stockpiled supplies, NGOs prepared backup plans, and neighboring governments prepared for refugee flows. Escalation had a high human cost, reminding us that strategic decisions touch millions. Strategic messaging between Washington and Tehran improves. The Iranian officials stated any foreign strike would violate national sovereignty and international law. U.S. officials also pledged to defend their allies and the seas. Public support and legitimacy may impact the war, therefore both sides worked to influence how people saw things at home and abroad. After dark, the Gulf region was still tight and dangerous. Naval fleets, missile groups, drone squadrons, and electronic warfare assets were ready, but politicians faced uncertainty, risk, and opportunity. Analysts noted that military might, political requirements, and psychological pressure combined to worsen matters swiftly in this unique age. Energy security, geopolitical influence, and regional stability were at stake, and the world's eyes were on a tiny strip of water that had traditionally been a source of richness in war. Every decision had global repercussions, every signal could be misinterpreted, and every action could start a chain reaction. The Gulf held its breath as civilians and leaders prepared for the next chapter, knowing that the next few days may change the balance of power in the region and affect world relations for years, if not decades. The narrative was more than a local battle. It was a turning point in a changing globe. Everyone from the military leader to the civilian played a high-stakes game of strategy, perception, and survival. By the next morning, the Gulf region was on high alert, watching every movement and indication for action. Iran had moved many advanced missile batteries, including short and medium range systems that could attack adjacent infrastructure, according to U.S. intelligence reports. Meanwhile, ground reports suggested Iranian naval soldiers had increased patrols at choke points with quick assault boats and electronic countermeasure vessels, making it tougher for the U.S. and its allies to monitor. Military officials highlighted that these defense-looking tactics gave Iran a lot of offensive power if conflict broke out. Iran's ties to regional non-state actors complicated matters. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Shia forces were better prepared than ever and kept communication lines open to cooperate rapidly. Analysts warned that a little clash could escalate into a multi-front war that threatened U.S. facilities, shipping lines, and regional security. Satellite photographs, intercepted conversations, and ground reports from ally soldiers were examined by the National Security Council numerous times in Washington. Planners discussed preventative efforts to avoid civilian casualties and discourage. Still, diplomatic lines were open. The U.S. deployed officials to Europe, the Gulf states, and the UN to signal its desire to calm matters but firm response to provocation. Despite these efforts, tension remained on the ground. Israel began statewide preparation drills to test early warning, missile interception, and emergency communication systems. Evacuation routes, shelter locations, and crisis response were discussed. The psychological toll was high. Life continued, but a persistent sense of dread made regular tasks feel fragile in the face of geopolitical uncertainty. Iran, however, continued media warfare to demonstrate power and determination. Military drills, missile testing, and high-ranking officials emphasizing national sovereignty and not letting other countries interfere dominated state-run media. These stories on social media impacted Iran's and the world's view of Tehran's ambitions. The area was getting worse economically. In response to uncertainty, oil prices rose further. The threat of maritime supply line blockades or strikes increased instability. Countries dependent on Gulf oil sought alternatives as banks prepared for market instability. When attacks on energy infrastructure, financial networks, and communication systems grew prevalent and advanced, cybersecurity emerged. Analysts claimed these efforts could prepare for kinetic attacks and improve discussions. Military exercises between the U.S. and regional partners increased. Modern fighter jets, Navy ships, and missile defense systems were utilized to demonstrate readiness and deter Iran. Cyber and electronic warfare training were also held to maintain information dominance. It shows how complicated modern battle is. Meanwhile, humanitarian worries grew. Hospitals in southern Iraq and other locations prepared for large casualties, and NGOs provided food, drink, and shelter. Regional governments monitored refugee flows and backup routes because even a modest increase may change lives. Inside Tehran, arguments continued. Hardliners demanded maximum force for ideological and political advantage at home. Moderates publicly supported the resistance tale but privately warned that going too far could create an uncontrollable spiral of escalation. These internal dynamics highlighted how difficult domestic politics, ideology, and strategic planning are. They revealed that every public statement was calculated and compromised. Maritime activity in the Gulf remained dangerous. Commercial shipping shifted, Navy convoys were protected, and regional intelligence cooperation increased. Analysts suggested random contacts like crashes or ship misidentification might lead to larger conflicts. This shows how fragile peace is in contentious waters. These changes affected the world. Every report affected the financial markets. Commodities prices fluctuated, and energy-dependent nations weren't sure if they'd get it. Economic implications of long-term volatility could affect global trade, investment, and politics, analysts say. Social media also grew in importance. Platforms distribute rumors, photos, and videos of military activity without verification, causing public concern and changing perceptions. Iran and the U.S. employed these channels purposefully, recognizing that story control may be as vital as battlefields. Always prioritized intelligence operations. Drones, satellites, and signal interception provided near real-time enemy movement data. Analysts had to make sense of data from multiple sources, knowing that mistakes may have catastrophic consequences. Even with careful planning and following the guidelines, miscommunication or accidental escalation were possible. For political reasons, both countries conveyed messages to bolster their strategic positions. Tehran emphasized strength, independence, and self-defense. Washington emphasized alliances, maritime security, and international rules. These communications were meticulously crafted to win public support, shift global attitudes, and stop hostilities without war. It became evident how the conflict influenced people's brains throughout the day. Iranians and Israelis lived in fear, balancing daily life with risk awareness. The continual flood of news, analysis, and social media criticism made people uneasy and vigilant, changing their behavior. Military changes occurred. Navy ships performed complex maneuvers, missile defense systems were activated, and air surveillance increased. Fast technological integration, including adding cyber capabilities, drones, and electronic warfare to traditional military forces, made the battlefield more dynamic, where adaptability and information superiority may decide the outcome, analysts said. Diplomacy remained busy. Envoys, backchannels, and international organizations tried to reduce tensions through diplomacy while acknowledging each party's realpolitik constraints. Despite these efforts, the situation was perilous, with both sides determined and eager to act if provoked. Military, economic, and psychological forces all came together to make a unique situation where every choice, speech, and action had bigger effects. Analysts cautioned that even little occurrences could start a chain reaction that could lead to regional and global war. Nighttime did not change the Gulf's perilous balance. Naval fleets remained in crucial locations, missile batteries remained alert, and intelligence networks monitored events. Civilians lived in uncertainty as political leaders made complex calculations to reconcile domestic pressure, strategic goals, and foreign expectations. Every signal, action, and conversation was carefully analyzed with the knowledge that things may turn worse at any time. This was a high-stakes game of strategy, perception, and talent. Military preparation, political calculation, economic turmoil, and societal resilience were interconnected, making mistakes simple and hard to handle. Everyone in the area held their breath as night fell, knowing that the coming events may affect the Gulf, global power, energy security, and international relations for years. This sensitive moment, a test of statecraft, and a crucible for the fragile equilibrium that had kept crises under control until now, was watched worldwide.